Nobody will tell you this. The people who disrespect you the most are often the people who know you will forgive them. Think about that. The colleague who constantly crosses the line, the friend who keeps breaking promises, the family member who speaks to you in ways they would never dare speak to someone else. Why? Why do some people receive respect naturally, while others spend years begging for it and never get it? The answer is uncomfortable. Respect has very little to do with what you deserve, and everything to do with what you tolerate. Most people spend their entire lives believing the opposite. They think if they're kind enough, patient enough, understanding enough, people will eventually appreciate them. But reality doesn't work that way. In fact, some of the most generous people in the world are treated like doormats. Not because they're weak, because they've trained others to believe there are no consequences. And once people learn there are no consequences, everything changes. A small act of disrespect becomes a habit becomes a pattern, and a pattern becomes your reality. Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most people still refuse to accept. People rarely stop when they can. They stop when they must. That's why some individuals seem to command respect the moment they enter a room, while others are constantly ignored, dismissed, interrupted, manipulated, and taken for granted. The difference isn't luck. The difference isn't confidence. The difference is what they refuse to tolerate. Now here's the dangerous part. Many of the behaviors destroying your power don't look serious at first. A joke, a lie, a broken promise, a dismissive comment, a crossed boundary. Individually, they seem insignificant, but together, they slowly teach people that your standards don't matter. And once that lesson is learned, getting your respect back becomes 10 times harder than protecting it in the first place. So before we begin, I want you to ask yourself one question. What behavior am I still tolerating that I know I shouldn't? Because one of the 7 behaviors we're about to discuss is probably happening in your life right now. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why allowing it may be costing you far more than you realize. Let's begin. Number 1. Accepting lies. Let me tell you something most men learn too late. A lie is never about information. It's about power. The moment someone lies to you, they're not just hiding the truth. They're measuring you. They're asking a silent question. How much can I get away with? And what happens next determines the entire future of that relationship. Most men know when they're being lied to. That's the uncomfortable part. The signs are there. The story doesn't add up. The details change. The energy feels wrong. That instinct in your gut starts whispering that something isn't right. But then another voice appears. The weaker voice that says, maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe it's not worth the argument. Maybe I should just let it go. And that's where the trap closes. Because in that moment, you're not choosing peace, you're choosing comfort. There's a difference. A dangerous difference. I once watched a man catch his business partner in a small lie about money. Nothing major, a few numbers that didn't quite match. He noticed it immediately, but instead of confronting it, he convinced himself it wasn't important. He wanted to avoid conflict. 6 months later, that same small lie had turned into tens of thousands lost. The betrayal didn't begin when the money disappeared. It began the day he ignored what he already knew. That's how deception works. It doesn't arrive as a catastrophe, it arrives as a test. A tiny violation, a tiny distortion, a tiny crack in the foundation. And every time you ignore it, you're teaching people something dangerous. You can deceive me and survive. Maybe that's why so many men feel trapped in relationships, friendships, and workplaces they secretly resent. They weren't destroyed by one massive betrayal. They were destroyed by 1,000 moments of tolerated dishonesty. One lie, then another, until reality itself becomes negotiable. Machiavelli understood something brutal about human nature. People rarely respect boundaries they never feel, and a lie without consequences is permission. That's why silence is expensive, far more expensive than confrontation. Because confrontation costs discomfort, but silence costs dignity. And most men spend years paying that price without realizing it. Now here's where things get interesting. The moment you calmly expose a lie, masks start falling off. Watch carefully. Honest people usually correct themselves. They explain, they apologize. They value the relationship more than their ego. Manipulative people do something different. They get angry. Not because you're wrong, but because you noticed. They'll call you paranoid. They'll tell you you're imagining things. They'll try to make you question your own perception. And if that doesn't work, they'll attack you for bringing it up. Pay attention. That reaction reveals more than the lie ever did. Because the real test was never whether they lied. The real test was whether you had enough self-respect to challenge it. Most men fail that test, not because they're weak, but because they're addicted to being liked. They want approval more than they want truth, and the world punishes that addiction brutally. Listen carefully. You do not need to scream. You do not need drama. You do not need emotional speeches. Power is much colder than that. Power looks someone in the eye and calmly says, "That's not what happened." Then, it waits, because their reaction will tell you everything. Some people will respect you more, others will disappear. Good. Let them. Anyone who requires your silence in order to stay in your life was never respecting you in the first place. They were controlling you. And there's a difference every man eventually has to learn. Number 2, emotional put-downs disguised as honesty. This one is dangerous because it doesn't arrive as an attack. It arrives as advice, a joke, a concerned observation, a sentence wrapped in a smile. And that's exactly why so many men miss it. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're excited about something. A new business, a new goal, a new direction in life. You share it with someone close to you, and instead of support, you hear something like, "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Let's be realistic here. I don't think you're that type of guy. Don't get offended, I'm just being honest. The words sound harmless, but somehow, after the conversation ends, your energy is gone, your certainty is gone, your enthusiasm is gone. You entered that conversation standing tall, you left questioning yourself. That wasn't honesty, that was psychological positioning. Most men never understand this. Not every attack is designed to destroy you. Some attacks are designed to reduce you. Just enough, not enough for you to react, not enough for others to notice, just enough to make you doubt yourself. And a man who doubts himself becomes easier to control. Machiavelli understood that direct opposition creates resistance, but uncertainty creates dependence. That's why the most effective manipulators rarely attack your strengths directly. They poison your confidence one drop at a time. A comment here, a joke there, a subtle criticism disguised as concern. Death by 1,000 cuts. I've seen this happen countless times. A man starts becoming successful, his confidence grows, his standards rise. Suddenly, someone around him starts making innocent observations. You've changed. You think you're better than everyone now. You take yourself too seriously. Notice what's really happening. They're not criticizing your flaws, they're criticizing your growth. Because your growth threatens the version of you they were comfortable controlling. Here's something most people don't realize: real honesty feels different. Real honesty feels different. Real honesty may sting, but it creates clarity. You leave the conversation stronger, you leave with direction, you leave knowing exactly what to improve. Manipulation feels completely different. You leave confused, you leave emotionally drained, you leave replaying the conversation in your head at 2 a.m., wondering if they're right, wondering if you're the problem, wondering if you're becoming someone you shouldn't become. That confusion is not a side effect, it's the objective. Confused men seek validation, confident men don't. And validation is one of the easiest forms of control in existence. Pay attention to people who constantly position themselves as the judge of your worth, the evaluator, the critic, the authority. The person who always seems to have an opinion about your decisions, your ambitions, your appearance, your relationships, and your future. Why? Who appointed them? Who gave them that authority? The answer is simple: you did. The moment you kept listening without pushing back, the moment you accepted disrespect disguised as honesty, the moment you prioritized being liked over being respected. Listen carefully. A strong man doesn't reject feedback, he rejects manipulation. There's a difference. When someone genuinely wants to help you, they give clarity, but when someone wants control, they give doubt. And once you learn that distinction, everything changes. The next time someone says, "I'm just being honest," stop listening to the words. Watch the outcome. Do you feel empowered or diminished? Do you feel challenged or weakened? Do you feel respected or managed? Your gut already knows the answer. Most men simply ignore it because they fear confrontation. Stop doing that. Because the people who constantly make you feel smaller are rarely trying to help you become better. They're trying to make sure you never become bigger than them. And that is a game no self-respecting man should ever agree to play. Number 3, ignoring boundaries. This is where most men lose their power, not because they're weak, not because they're incapable, but because they confuse kindness with permission. Let me explain something most people will never tell you. A boundary is not a request. A boundary is not a preference. A boundary is not a conversation. A boundary is a test, not for the other person, but for you. The moment you tell someone what you will and will not tolerate, a clock starts ticking, and sooner or later, they will test it, always. Maybe not consciously, maybe not maliciously, but they will. Because human beings are constantly looking for the edges of other people's standards. They're trying to discover where the real line is, not the line you talk about, but the line you defend. Think about it. How many times have you told someone not to do something, only to watch them do it again a week later? The disrespect wasn't the second violation. The disrespect happened the moment they realized your words carried no weight. That's the brutal reality. People don't listen to boundaries. They listen to consequences. I once knew a man who constantly complained that people never respected his time. Friends showed up late, women canceled plans last minute, family members interrupted his schedule whenever they wanted. He had endless conversations about respect, endless explanations, endless second chances, and nothing changed. You know why? Because every complaint ended the same way, no consequence. Everyone around him eventually learned a dangerous lesson. His frustration was real, his boundaries weren't. And that's exactly how most men live. They announce standards they have no intention of enforcing. Then they wonder why nobody takes them seriously. Machiavelli understood something uncomfortable about human nature. Rules without consequences create contempt, not respect, contempt. Because once people discover your boundaries are negotiable, they stop seeing them as boundaries. They become suggestions, and suggestions only matter when they're convenient. Watch carefully. The first violation tells you who they are, and the second violation tells you who you are. Because now the ignorance excuse is gone. Now they know. Now they've seen your line. Now they're making a choice. And if they cross it again, they're sending a message, a very clear message. My desires matter more than your standards. The question is, what message do you send back? Most men send weakness. They negotiate, they explain, they justify, they hope. They pray the person finally understands. They won't. Because understanding was never the problem. Lack of consequences was. That's why enforcement feels so uncomfortable. Nobody talks about this part. The first time you actually enforce a boundary, you'll feel guilty, you'll feel cold. Part of you will wonder if you're overreacting. Another part will tell you to give them one more chance, one more conversation, one more warning. That's not compassion. That's fear wearing a compassionate mask. Fear of losing approval, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as the bad guy. But here's the irony. The people who truly respect you rarely complain about your boundaries. The people who benefited from violating them always do. Pay attention to who becomes angry when you start protecting your space, because that reaction reveals everything. Healthy people adjust, entitled people resist, and resistance is information. The cold truth is this: every person in your life is watching what happens after they cross a line. Not what you say, but what you do. Your actions become your reputation, your consequences become your identity, and eventually, people place you into one of two categories: the man whose standards are real, or the man whose standards disappear the moment they're challenged. Choose carefully, because your future relationships will be built on that answer. Number 4, letting people waste your time. This one is subtle, so subtle that most men never recognize it until years of their life are already gone. Because nobody steals your time all at once. They steal it in small pieces. 10 minutes here, an hour there, a canceled plan, a broken promise, a delayed response, a meeting that never happens. And before you know it, you've spent months, sometimes years, investing in people who were never investing in you. Here's a truth that most people are too uncomfortable to say out loud. Time is the purest form of respect. Not words, not compliments, not promises, but time. Because unlike money, attention, or affection, time is the one thing nobody gets back. Which means every time someone wastes your time repeatedly, they're telling you exactly how they value you. Not with words, with behavior, and behavior never lies. Think about that friend who is always late, the woman who keeps saying she's interested, but somehow can never make time to see you, the business partner who promises to call next week and disappears for a month, the family member who only contacts you when they need something. Notice something. Notice something. These people are never late for things they truly care about. They're not missing flights. They're not forgetting important interviews. They're not showing up 30 minutes late to opportunities that benefit them. Amazing how organized people become when the situation matters enough. That's why repeated lateness is rarely incompetence. It's prioritization. And that realization stings, because most men would rather believe someone is busy than accept they are low on that person's priority list. I've seen men spend years chasing certainty from people who already gave them an answer through their actions. A woman cancels dinner 3 times. He keeps trying. A friend breaks his word over and over. He keeps trusting. A business contact keeps delaying opportunities. He keeps waiting. Why? Because hope is addictive, and hope often keeps men trapped in situations that reality has already explained. Machiavelli understood something most people never learn. Power belongs to the person who controls access, not the person waiting for it. The moment someone realizes you'll always wait, you'll always forgive, you'll always forgive, you'll always rearrange your life around their convenience, without realizing it, you've placed yourself below them. And here's the dangerous part. People who waste your time are constantly studying your reactions. Every excuse you accept teaches them something. Every broken commitment you forgive teaches them something. Every delay you tolerate teaches them something. They're learning the price of disrespecting you, and if the price is 0, why would they stop? Listen carefully. The strongest men I know don't argue about respect, they measure it. Someone cancels repeatedly. They stop making plans. Someone keeps delaying decisions. They move on. Someone constantly breaks promises. They stop depending on them. No drama, no emotional speeches, no desperate attempts to convince people to value them. Just distance. Cold, calm, final. Because a man's time is his life in physical form, and every minute you give someone is a minute you'll never get back. That's why protecting your time isn't selfish, it's self-respect. Watch what happens when you stop being endlessly available. Some people suddenly become more respectful. Interesting, isn't it? Others become angry. They accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, of acting different. Pay attention to that reaction. Because people who respected your time never noticed a difference. Only the people who benefited from wasting it did, and that's the lesson. The people who truly value you don't need reminders. They don't need repeated warnings. They don't need endless second chances. They simply show up. Everyone else is giving you information. The question is whether you're willing to believe it. Because the moment you stop negotiating the value of your time is the moment people start treating it like it actually matters. Number 5, selective accountability. This is one of the most dangerous forms of disrespect because it doesn't feel like an attack, it feels like reality. That's why so many men stay trapped in it for years. Maybe you're in it right now. Maybe you've been in it so long that you've stopped noticing it. Watch carefully. When they make mistakes, there's always a reason. They're stressed. They're overwhelmed. They're tired. They're going through something. Life has been difficult lately. You need to understand. You need to be patient. You need to show compassion. But the moment you make a mistake, everything changes. Suddenly context disappears. Understanding disappears. Compassion disappears. Now you're careless. Now you're selfish. Now you're immature. Now you're the problem. Does that sound familiar? Because if it does, you're not dealing with fairness. You're dealing with a power structure. And power structures always operate under different rules for different people. I once knew a man who spent years trying to save a relationship that was destroying him. Every argument ended exactly the same way. If she hurt him, there was an explanation. If he reacted to being hurt, there was a punishment. If she crossed a line, he was expected to understand. If he crossed a line, he was expected to apologize. Eventually, he started apologizing for things he didn't even do. Think about how insane that is. He became so conditioned to carrying blame that guilt became his default setting. And that's what selective accountability does. It rewires your perception of reality. Slowly, quietly, without you noticing. At first, you're defending yourself, then you're explaining yourself, then you're questioning yourself. Then eventually, you're accusing yourself. The manipulation becomes internal, and you start doing their job for them. Machiavelli understood that control becomes effortless when one person accepts responsibility for everything while the other accepts responsibility for nothing, because guilt is one of the most powerful control mechanisms ever created. A guilty man is easy to manage, easy to manipulate, easy to keep in line. He spends all his energy proving he's not the villain. Meanwhile, the real villain never has to answer a single question. Pay attention to the people in your life. Who is always apologizing? Who is always explaining? Who is always trying to fix things? And who is always judging? Who is always criticizing? Who is always finding reasons why their behavior should be excused? That pattern reveals more than words ever will. Here's the secret most men never learn. People who demand accountability from others while refusing accountability themselves are not seeking justice. They're seeking authority. This isn't about right and wrong. It's about hierarchy. They're unconsciously creating a world where they sit above the rules, and you sit beneath them, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Watch what happens when you finally point it out, when you calmly say, "Interesting." When you do it, there's a reason. When I do it, it's a character flaw. Notice the reaction. Most of the time, they won't address the double standard. They'll attack you for noticing it. They'll say you're keeping score, you're being dramatic, you're bringing up the past, you're too sensitive, anything except answering the actual point. Because the moment equal standards enter the conversation, the game starts falling apart, and people benefiting from unfair rules never want fair rules. Listen carefully. Healthy relationships don't require one permanent defendant and one permanent judge. Healthy relationships don't have one person carrying all the blame while the other carries all the excuses. That's not love. That's not friendship. That's not partnership. It's a hierarchy disguised as a relationship. And the cold truth is this. The moment someone consistently demands standards from you that they refuse to meet themselves, they are revealing exactly how they see you. Not as an equal, as a subordinate. And no self-respecting man should ever volunteer for that position. Number 6, dismissing your standards. Pay attention to what happens the moment you stop accepting less. It's one of the most revealing things you'll ever witness. The same people who were perfectly comfortable giving you the bare minimum suddenly become deeply concerned about your expectations. Interesting, isn't it? For years, they had no problem benefiting from your patience, your understanding, your availability, your willingness to tolerate behavior that never should have been tolerated. But the moment you raise the bar, everything changes. Now you're difficult. Now you're demanding. Now you've changed. Now you've become too much. Let me translate what they're really saying. You were easier to control before. That's the part nobody says out loud. Because standards are not just standards. Standards are filters. And filters are dangerous to people who were getting access they never earned. Think about the man who finally decides he won't tolerate disrespect anymore. No more last-minute cancellations. No more mixed signals. No more one-sided friendships. No more relationships where effort only moves in one direction. Watch what happens. Suddenly everyone has an opinion. You're expecting too much. Nobody's perfect. You're going to end up alone. Funny how those warnings always appear when you're asking people to do more, never when they're asking you to accept less. That's not advice. That's resistance. Machiavelli understood something most men never learn. People rarely fear your weakness. They fear losing access to your strengths. The moment you raise your standards, you're doing something powerful. You're making access conditional. Your time becomes conditional. Your attention becomes conditional. Your commitment becomes conditional. Your presence becomes conditional. And that terrifies people who became comfortable receiving those things without earning them. I've seen this happen countless times. A man spends years being available to everyone, always answering, always helping, always sacrificing, always understanding. The moment he starts saying no, people accuse him of becoming selfish. Not because he's changed, because the benefits they were receiving have changed. And people often mistake lost access for injustice. That's why you must be careful. Some of the loudest criticism you'll ever receive comes right after you begin respecting yourself. The people who genuinely care about you usually adapt. The people who benefited from your lack of standards usually complain. That's a distinction worth remembering. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Most men are not afraid of having standards. They're afraid of the consequences. They're afraid of who they'll lose, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being judged, afraid of being alone. So they lower the bar again and again and again and again and again, until one day they wake up surrounded by people they secretly resent. People they tolerated instead of respected. People they kept because they feared losing them. That is a terrible trade. Because every person you keep by lowering your standards costs you a piece of your self-respect. And self-respect is always more valuable than approval. Listen carefully. You are not asking for perfection. You are asking for reciprocity. You are asking for consistency. You are asking for basic respect. You are asking for people to bring the same energy they expect to receive. That is not a luxury. That is the minimum. And if the minimum feels overwhelming to someone, the problem is not your standards. The problem is their effort. Never negotiate that truth. Because the strongest men understand something that weak men spend years avoiding. Every standard you lower to keep someone in your life becomes a future source of resentment. Every standard you defend becomes a filter, and filters create clarity. The wrong people leave. The right people stay. The users leave. The builders stay. The takers leave. The contributors stay. And that's why raising your standards isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming selective. Because a man who gives everyone access eventually loses his value, but a man who protects access controls his value. And control is exactly what people lose when they stop settling for less than they deserve. Number 7, testing you after you speak up. This is the moment that separates men who have standards from men who merely talk about them, and almost nobody sees it coming. Most people think the hard part is setting the boundary. It isn't. The hard part comes after. Because the moment you finally speak up, the moment you finally say no, the moment you finally stop tolerating something, a test begins. Not an obvious test, a subtle one, a quiet one, a dangerous one. Because people rarely challenge your boundaries head-on. They're smarter than that. Instead, they probe, they experiment, they look for weaknesses, they look for hesitation. They look for evidence that you didn't really mean what you said. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how someone suddenly behaves for a few days after you confront them? Everything seems fine. They're respectful, careful, almost cooperative. Then, out of nowhere, something small happens. A little joke, a little delay, A tiny act of disrespect, barely noticeable, almost innocent. That's not an accident. That's reconnaissance. They're gathering information. They're asking one question. Is the boundary still there? Because human nature works the same way everywhere. In relationships, in friendships, in business, in family dynamics. People don't trust words, they trust patterns. And they're trying to figure out whether your new standard is a permanent reality or just a temporary emotion. I knew a man who finally confronted a friend who constantly disrespected him. For years, he tolerated the sarcasm, the subtle insults, the constant attempts to undermine him in front of other people. One day, he finally had enough. He spoke clearly, calmly, directly. The friend apologized immediately. Everything seemed fixed. Then 2 weeks later, during a group conversation, the friend made another small comment, not as bad as before, not obvious enough to create a scene, just enough. And that's where most men fail, because the mind immediately starts negotiating, maybe he didn't mean it, maybe I'm overreacting. It wasn't that serious. Wrong. The seriousness isn't the point, the test is. The comment was never about the comment. The comment was about measuring your response. Because manipulators understand something most men don't. If they can make you abandon your standards once, they can make you abandon them again, and again, and again, until your boundaries become nothing more than empty speeches. This is why power is never established through words, only through action. Anybody can make declarations, anybody can make threats, anybody can talk about self-respect, but very few people are willing to enforce it. Machiavelli understood a brutal truth about human behavior. Authority isn't created when you make a rule. Authority is created when someone breaks the rule and discovers the consequence is real. That's the moment everything changes, not before, after. When someone tests you and you enforce the boundary, something happens psychologically. The uncertainty disappears, the negotiation ends, the game becomes clear. Now they know, now they've seen it. Now they understand the line exists. And most people immediately adjust, not because they suddenly respect your words, because they finally respect your actions. The ones who continue testing. Let them go, seriously. Let them remove themselves. Because here's the secret nobody talks about. The test was never really about them, it was about you. Your self-respect, your discipline, your willingness to protect what you claim matters. Every boundary eventually asks the same question. Will you betray yourself to keep someone comfortable? Most men do. That's why they spend years trapped in the same cycles, the same disrespect, the same frustration, the same frustration. But the man who refuses, the man who stays calm, follows through, and accepts whatever leaves because of it. That's the man people stop testing. Because sooner or later everyone learns the same lesson. His standards are not negotiable. And once people believe that, everything changes. Do you? That's the question everything comes down to. Not whether people respect you, not whether they understand you, not whether they agree with you. Do you respect yourself enough to stop tolerating what you know is destroying your life? Because here's the truth most men spend years running from. Disrespect is rarely imposed, it's permitted. It's permitted. I know that's uncomfortable, maybe even offensive, but stay with me, because buried inside that truth is something most people never discover: freedom. Think back over the last few years of your life. The lies you ignored, the boundaries you abandoned, the promises you believed after the third, fourth, fifth disappointment. The people who showed you exactly who they were, and yet somehow you kept giving them access. Why? Because you wanted to believe, because you saw potential, because you hoped they would change, because walking away felt harder than staying. Most men don't lose their power in one dramatic moment. They lose it gradually, one compromise at a time, one excuse at a time, one act of tolerated disrespect at a time, until one day they wake up surrounded by people they secretly resent. People who drain them, people who use them, people who no longer see them as equals. And the worst part, deep down, they know exactly how it happened. They were there every step of the way, Silence became permission. Tolerance became expectation. Availability became entitlement. And eventually, disrespect became normal. That's why this isn't really a video about other people. It's about you. It's about the uncomfortable moments when you knew something was wrong and said nothing. The moments when your instincts screamed at you, but your fear overruled them. Fear of conflict. Fear of losing someone. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being alone. The truth is, most men are not controlled by other people. They're controlled by their own need for approval, and once someone discovers that need, the game is over. Because a man who desperately wants to be liked can be manipulated. A man who desperately wants to keep everyone happy can be controlled. A man who fears losing people will tolerate things he should never tolerate. That's why power begins where approval ends. Machiavelli understood something that remains true today. The strongest position in any relationship belongs to the person willing to walk away. Not because he's cruel, not because he's cold, because he's free. Free from dependence, free from validation, free from the fear that keeps most people trapped. Listen carefully. You don't need another conversation. You don't need another explanation. You don't need another chance to convince people to respect you. People already know. They know when they're wasting your time. They know when they're crossing your boundaries. They know when they're disrespecting you. The real question is whether you know it, and more importantly, what you're willing to do about it. Protect your time because nobody will do it for you. Protect your standards because nobody else benefits from them except you. Protect your peace because once it's gone, everything else becomes harder. And when people repeatedly prove they don't deserve access to you, believe them, not their promises, not their apologies, not their intentions, their actions. Always their actions. The people who genuinely value you will adapt. The people who only valued access to you will resist. Let them. Because every person who leaves after you establish standards was never loyal to you. They were loyal to the version of you they could control. And there is a difference, a massive difference. This is what most men eventually discover. Power is not found in what you acquire. Power is found in what you refuse. What you refuse to tolerate, what you refuse to excuse, what you refuse to negotiate. The moment you understand that, everything changes. So now the choice is yours. Keep tolerating, keep explaining, keep hoping, or become the man whose standards are stronger than his fear of losing people, because that's the moment respect begins. Not from them, from you. If this video exposed something you've been avoiding, hit the like button, subscribe, and stay close. There are more uncomfortable truths ahead, more illusions to destroy, more hidden games to expose, but only for men who are ready to stop asking for respect and start becoming impossible to disrespect. Drop this final affirmation in the comments. I choose power.